Hello, everybody. Brenna here from Mad as a Bren. And on today's episode, we're going to be covering something that's kind of gross, kind of spooky, trigger warning. So when I decided on this topic, I had a lot of mixed emotions about it. First, I was excited and I was like, oh, that sounds super interesting. Spontaneous human combustion. What can go wrong? And then I thought, well, I have OCD, so then I thought everything. But I thought, can I spontaneously combust at any point in time? And then after researching this episode, I felt a lot better about it. So maybe you will too. We're going to get into the science behind it, the mystery behind it. Is it even real? We'll find out in this episode. Anyways, so enough of all that. Let's get into the bones of it. I'm sorry, but what even is spontaneous human combustion? In a nutshell, it is when someone spontaneously bursts into flame. Fire? Flame or fire. So this happens instantaneously and without warning. 1 minute they're there, and the next minute they're engulfed in a big ball of flames, and there's body chunks spread across the room. Maybe. In some cases, perhaps. We'll find out. We're going to dive into it. Again, trigger warning. This gets kind of gross, but we're not going to be distasteful. Just gross. Although this is something we don't quite worry about now in our everyday lives, in the 1800s, this was a big deal. This was a very big concern to people back then. There are a dozen instances in literature before the 1900s that describe people exploding into flame. If you read Mark Twain, Charles Dickens, Herman Melville, and many other famous authors, they have all mentioned spontaneous combustion, even if not directly by that name. It's seen in movies, TV shows, comics especially. Superheroes that can ignite their entire body within seconds. I'm talking to you, Human Torch. Although the stuff seen in movies is not quite as gruesome as what I personally think of when I think of this topic. So before we dive into the scientific reasoning behind spontaneous human combustion, let's look at a few examples of instances in time where people genuinely thought that the loss of their loved one was because of spontaneous human combustion. That's a mouthful. I wonder how many times we're going to say that in this episode. Say it with me. Every time. Wait, I'm not being distasteful. Never mind. Don't take a shot every time I say spontaneous human combustion. The first case we know of was in Milan in the late 1400s. A knight by the name of Paulinus Vorstius was said to have burst into flame in front of his parents. So Paulinus was said to have consumed a lot of alcohol, and apparently he burped out a flame after a few glasses of wine. In the early 18th century, sober citizens and churchgoers loved to harp on about the evils of alcohol abuse and how you're going straight to hell. No, that's not what they said. They did say that it would cause you to spontaneously burst into flame, though. On the evening of June 20th, 1745, Countess Cornelia Zangari de Bandi of Cesena of Verona burned to death. She was 62 years old. She went to bed at a normal hour, but when the maid came in the following morning, she found the Countess's corpse on the floor in the most dreadful condition. At the distance of 4 feet from the bed, there was a heap of ashes. Her legs with the stockings on remained untouched, and the head half burned lay between them. Nearly all the rest of her body was reduced to ashes. The bed was disturbed as if she had risen from it, but neither it nor any other items in the room had been disturbed by the fire. The Countess, of course, had been a known drinker. Next on our list of potential victims we're going to discuss, Matilda Rooney. The year is 1885 in Seneca, Illinois. It's Christmas Eve, and Matilda is spending the evening with her husband Patrick and their farmhand John Larson. They have all been drinking a few drinks when John decides he's going to go upstairs and tuck her out for the evening. John recalls at some point throughout the night that he woke up coughing so bad he was having trouble catching his breath, but he was eventually able to fall back asleep. So fast forward to Christmas morning. John wakes up and notices that there are black marks on his pillow that resemble soot. He decides to go downstairs and is looking for Patrick. He finds Patrick dead in his bedroom. But where's Matilda? She's nowhere to be found. It's said that later on in the evening, John walks into the kitchen and finds a huge black hole in the floor, which apparently contains the remains of a human foot. There is a pile of ashes in the middle of this huge black hole, presumably Matilda Rooney. There had been speculation throughout the years that John was responsible for her murder, but how did he start a fire that was strong enough to engulf her entire body, but yet didn't spread to the rest of the house? The estimated temperature that the fire reached that night was 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit, or 1,400 degrees Celsius. So why was there no sign of damage anywhere other than that spot? And I bet you're also wondering, how did Patrick die? Well, smoke inhalation, which could also explain why Larson woke up in the middle of the night having a coughing fit. His door was closed, so in theory, it kind of makes sense that he wouldn't have passed away from smoke inhalation being on the second floor upstairs and having his door closed. So why did Matilda explode? Could alcohol consumption have played a part in it? Local legends in her town said that she died of divine retribution from being bold enough to drink so much on Christmas Eve. If the locals back home could see us now. Am I right? I don't drink, but if I did. All right, moving on. So next on our list, we're going to dive into the story of Mary Reer. Now, if you're curious, Google images. Actually, I think I might put some images here, but I don't think I can show like that much on the tube. We'll see. We'll see what I put. The images I'm talking about are images of men cleaning up the crime scene. Or is it a crime scene if there wasn't foul play suspected? I don't know. Anyways, the discussion of Mary Reer, or as some might know her as Cinder Lady, from the newspaper during that time period. Mary was a woman residing in St. Petersburg, Florida. The year is 1981 on July 2nd. Mary's landlord, Pansy Carpenter, is coming to her apartment to give her a telegram. The internet also lists her exact address, but at first I was going to put it, but I'm not going to put it because like chances are someone lives there now. Would you want your address just out and about for the internet? Knowing that somebody just in your house? No. What if they don't know? They got to know. I feel like that has to be like disclosed. You know, Shirley. Don't call me Shirley. All right, I'm going to say it just in case you're listening and you live there. Then you can be like, that was my apartment. So the apartment was 1200 Cherry Street, Northeast, St. Petersburg, Florida. Back to our original programming. Pansy goes to open the door. Assuming she knocked first. We're going to make the assumption that she knocked first because rude. Anyway, so Pansy goes to open the door. She goes to touch the doorknob and it feels warm to the touch. That's your first clue. So what does Pansy do? She calls the police to come. Which I don't know if I would have immediately called the police to come if I felt a hot doorknob. I don't know. Would you? Would you have immediately called the police? Once the police get there, they find what we can assume to be Mary. It was largely a pile of ashes with some human remains found in the chair Mary had been sitting in. The only parts that were left of Mary were her backbone, skull, and part of her left foot, which was still wearing her slipper. Yeah. So Wikipedia says that her skull had been shrunk to the size of a teacup. This claim was disputed by a fire researcher who managed to view the scene. But do with that what you will. Because I don't know. What? I don't know. I don't know what to think about that. So in this instance, there was kind of stuff around Mary that had also been burned. There were plastic containers around the area that had been melted. So on July 7th, the chief of police, J.R. Reichert, sent a box full of evidence to FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. This box contained small objects that they thought were Mary's teeth, her slipper, some glass, carpet cutouts. You get the picture. The FBI concluded that Mary had been incinerated by something called the Wick effect, which I don't think it's cool that anyone got incinerated by any means, but the science behind the Wick effect is kind of cool and gross. Kind of cool and very gross. For those that don't know, the Wick effect is a partial or total deconstruction of a human body by fire, where the clothing soaks up melted human fat and acts like the wick of a candle. So this happens under certain conditions and has been observed before. Basically, a person can continue burning through their own fat after catching on fire. The body of a human, if they have clothes on, acts like an inside-out candle. So the human fat is like the candle itself, and the clothing is like the wick. Fat contains a large amount of energy from the presence of long hydrocarbon chains, so it can keep the fire going for a long time before the source is used up. It's kind of cool, right? It's kind of cool. You think it's cool. Gross, but cool. I think it's cool. We are on the same page. So back to Mary. Her family said that she was known to use sleeping pills, and they had a theory that she took her sleeping pills and then fell asleep for the night with a lit cigarette. So let's say the cigarette did fall down and ignited her nightgown. The nightgown, along with the other flammables like the chair and the fat from her body, I suppose could have been enough, in theory, to burn her entire body. Her daughter-in-law said in an interview, the cigarette dropped to her lap. Her fat was the fuel that kept her burning. The floor was cement and the chair was by itself. There was nothing around her to burn. Next on our list is a 76-year-old man by the name of Michael Faherty. Michael lived in Galway, Ireland, and was found dead on December 22nd, 2010. Michael was found to be extremely burned. There were no accelerants found at the scene or anything that could have been taken as foul play. The fireplace nearby could have been the cause. After examining the scene thoroughly, a coroner decided the cause of death had to be spontaneous human combustion. So, of course, a decision like this in today's society would come with some controversy, but there isn't much evidence out there to dispute the claims in the first place. So, what is the real cause of spontaneous human combustion? The most common characteristics seen in these cases are 1. The victims were older, usually over 60. 2. The victims were overweight. 3. The victims led inactive lives. It's not looking good for me. 4. The victims were alcoholics. I'm all right in that aspect. So far. There's still time. 5. Women were more prone to spontaneously combust than men. I don't love that. I don't love that. 6. At the scene, there was often an external flame, such as a candle or a fireplace, or a cigarette. Number 7. Combustion was extremely rapid. Number 8. The flames were difficult to extinguish. Number 9. The flames produced a strong and aromatic odor. Number 10. The room was coated in a thick, greasy, yellow film. Number 11. The fire usually consumed the trunk of the body, but left the extremities like the arms, legs, and your head. It would leave your head. Maybe. Probably. Number 12. The accidents occurred during fair weather and more commonly in winter than during summer, which would make sense because there are more fires in wintertime than there are during summer. Probably. I imagine. As far as the scientific community goes, the majority of us are not convinced that it is caused by anything internal or even spontaneous for that matter. The way the fire is limited to the victim isn't that far-fetched when you take into consideration that fire dies out naturally when they run out of fuel. If a fuel source is the body of fat, it would make sense that when the fat is gone, the fire goes out. I think the Wick effect is to blame for the majority of these cases. As for how the fire starts, I personally think it varies from case to case. For instance, Mary Reer was a known smoker. It makes sense that in her case, the fire was probably started by a cigarette. Statistically speaking, the majority of cases where we blame spontaneous human combustion, the victims were mostly elderly, alone, and sitting down or sleeping near the source of ignition. This seems to be a pattern with the cases of a lit cigarette nearby or perhaps an open fireplace. Also, almost all cases include the consumption of alcohol, which can be seen as an accelerant or at the very least make the victims less aware of an unintentional fire starting. So from the outside eye, what appears to be a spontaneous fire could have easily been started by something else. If no one else is there to view it, then who's to say how it actually started? Especially considering fires tend to burn up evidence. But in comparison to everything else that I have talked about, here is a different case of spontaneous human combustion. Back in the 1930s, farmers in New Zealand found that their pants were suddenly and inexplicably, randomly catching on fire. The problem with exploding trousers goes back to the first 2 decades of the 20th century when New Zealand turned to dairy farming as its main agricultural activity. Then, the invasive weed ragwort began to take hold in the country's pastures, and cows avoided eating ragwort, of course, because it's poisonous, which then caused it to spread even faster. In the early 1930s, farmers were demanding a solution from their government. Ragweed was out of hand. It was growing in all the pastures, and the cows were running out of grass to eat. There was a crisis on their hands. Enter sodium chlorite. This powerful chemical kills ragweed quickly and effectively. But what farmers didn't realize is that sodium chlorite becomes extremely flammable when mixed with other organic materials like cotton or wool found in farmers' pants. Farmers figured this out due to a famous story in 1931 involving Richard Buckley. The farmer spent a day spraying ragwort in his fields. When he returned home, he removed his trousers and hung them by the fire to dry. His pants exploded shortly afterwards. Buckley somehow got his pants outside and into the grass, where they continued to explode into flame for a little while longer. The farmer was unhurt, but very surprised, and rightfully so. And while this story, it kind of comes off as funny when you first hear about it, but some farmers weren't as lucky as Richard Buckley. One report said a pair of pants started to smolder due to friction from horseback riding. Other farmers suffered serious burns. The worst cases led to death. One farmer ignited a match in his home because he didn't have electricity, and the explosion killed him as he was going to check on his baby. So yeah, hardcore. The epidemic of exploding pants did not last long though, thankfully. Anecdotes quickly spread throughout New Zealand, and scientists discovered the cause. To apply sodium chlorate, farmers had to mix the powder with water. The spray got all over the ragwort and mercilessly killed the weed. The chemical also seeped into farmers' clothes. When the liquid dried, the tiny crystals left behind blended with cotton fibers and denim jeans. This caused the mixture to become highly flammable. Even a small increase in temperature or a sudden impact could set off the substance, and once farmers figured that out, there was a decline in sodium chlorate. So yeah, if this has taught us anything, it's that there is often an answer to any mystery, as dumb as it may be. Not the mystery, the answer. Anyways, so spontaneous combustion is not that spontaneous in the case of humans, anyways. All right, so thank you guys for listening. Like, subscribe, comment if you're feeling froggy and you're feeling nice and you want to do all those things. If you're going to leave a comment, make it a nice one, pretty please. And if I sound weird, kinda, it's because I have a cold. So, yep, that's that. That's the way the cookie crumbles. All right, thanks for watching. Tune in next week. We're going to talk about... It's a surprise. Do you like surprises? I do. Anyways, bye.